Hello. How is everyone doing today? I'm trying different settings to my microphone to see if it changes anything. This might be the best. Let me know how this one goes, you guys. Yeah, Germania episode 3. I didn't even think it would happen. I tried approaching it several different times, several different ways. I have a lot of different chapters and paragraphs already written out in several different sections of my document with a lot of ideas, but then like the plot didn't make sense. But I knew that I knew what my plans were for the Italy collapse, at least the Balkan portion. So it was nice to get a video out for that. Hi everyone, yeah. So I would love to get you guys' ideas and opinions because this is a lot more different than my other projects. I wouldn't say I rushed into it, but I don't have as much of a vision for it as I did with like Stressa and stuff. But one thing I do like is this idea of having a collaborative state of the Germans in Serbia. The interesting thing about the way that this is all going to work out is the Balkans is like a microcosm of what's happening in the East. So it's either going to be a wake-up call or a like they should have known better thing for the no Germans. Yeah. So I'm just making assets for like potential use in videos, even if I'm making things that obviously look like the Serbians win their conflict with Montenegro. By me working on those assets, I would dare say that is, what the heck? Okay. This is very much misaligned. I would very much say that like you can't really trust the assets I make because in the past I've shown teasers for what the borders would be in the future and then turns out they aren't, so I'm not going to reveal stuff like that. But yeah, just never mind this. This is supposed to be like a live document where I don't use reference images anymore, but oh wait. Made a slight error here. There. If I alt click something and then I click a layer instead of clicking it, then I don't return to my old settings, so I have to do this all again. Yeah, I'm doing okay. Kids' last day of this week of summer camp is done. I've been really liking streaming. I'm glad to see that the Calder Creek stream went so well. The Calder Creek video, I edited the recording of the beginning, and before I even get to any suggestions besides a like pretty controversial thing that requires a lot of explanation, it's 10 minutes long. And I noticed that people skipped ahead in the chapters in the Krasnach video to get away from the like why did the mod die and just get to the content. So I'm kind of second guessing my approach with the video there, but I think it'll be okay. Alright, now that we've reoriented everything, like I think I might even just like go like, if you want to see more about this, if you just want to see the maps at the end, the pretty maps, you should check out my, or not check out my, like go to this point in the video. Sort of thing. So this is the layers I used for the editing of the third part. This is not alignments we want to put in part 4 stuff. This is a different outcome for the Balkans. I have the Macedonian borders selected. Why am I seeing? Oh right, because let's see this. So this is the borders in Macedonia, like the entire thing. So one thing I think would be really interesting is this border conflict here between Serbia and Macedonia, because I mean Serbia and Bulgaria, because like the fact that the Bulgarians, I think the Bulgarians were even garrisoning the Serbian puppet regime for a time, and it really upset people, and they were like, what the heck? Because the Serbians were like, oh hey, why are you taking our Macedonian land, and now why are you garrisoning us? And it's just another Balkan mishap, right? So that'll be interesting to see what happens there. I gave Serbia some of northern Albania because I think they had claims along those lines, and if Albania goes to a communist revolution, then surely they would claim territory, right? So we want a little rump Albania here too, and then the one thing that I think is going to be interesting is what happens with Croatia, because from my research I found that the Axis were really appalled by what the Croatians were doing, which is really, really ironic. So then what's going to happen when, like, they're probably going to be the flimsiest in regards to insurgencies. They might need to have an entire regime change, but what would that regime look like after? That's why I have some Serbian claims on Croatia in this instance. So we're going to have a pretty interesting outcome here, I think, if the Axis win this thing. And we'll have to change the name of the faction, because it's not so much the Axis anymore. Japan doesn't exist, and Italy is in a civil war. What's my opinion on Equestria at War? It's incredible, but also very not surprising that the best Hearts of Iron 4 mod is, well, I haven't played it, but I heard that people really like it. One of the best Hearts of Iron 4 mods is a My Little Pony fanfiction. That's the most interesting and like proud thing that I am of this community. I'm so proud of this community, is the fact that fighting horsies, friendship is magic, is one of the most enjoyable, well-designed, most art put into it experiences on this Steam Workshop for Hearts of Iron 4. So that's my take. Oh, well, if we're gonna partition Albania, I don't know what's gonna happen with Greece, but maybe we should have a maybe have them taking southern Albania too, because anti-communism, right? I have a proper selection for that somewhere. Is it in the Krasnov thing? No, it's not. I want to open up Fenrir. Where is that? This is what I mean by like my my organization of all my things is a little suboptimal. Like I was so confident that I would be using the old Stressa system. Oh, this is even before. That's crazy. That's before I expanded the map. That's definitely not the right one. Full map. I was so confident that I'd use the same file structure for a hypothetical Talons in Twilight video that I didn't even. Oh, this is not it either. Well, this is 1936. What about this? Nope. What is going on with this? Yeah, we're just not gonna look at this. Old files take up a lot of data, but I don't even know what I'm doing with them. So we'll just leave that for later, I think. But we have a interesting border of a greater Serbian federation. This is sort of the thing that the diplomat or the manager of the German manager of the puppet government thought would make sense for this region. But then what happens to Croatia? The fact that Croatia is like waning in support, the Italian monarchy is collapsing, there's a communist insurgency in Montenegro, I think that the Croatians would probably collapse. Is this some sort of new order last days of Europe? Well, it seems like the new order is not really going to last, because Britain has already stood up to the Germans. The Italians are fighting a civil war over their German alignment, and the French are now in a situation where, because the French are loose collaborators and they actually fought a war with the Allies against Japan, the South Italian kingdom is like, hey, we'll give you back the territories we took. Like, they're probably gonna ask for all those quasi Reichskommissariat stuff in the Burgundian region back to them. And if the Germans do go, okay, fine, here you go, maybe they keep the Benelux, but then they give back everything besides Alsace-Lorraine. What is going to happen to the failed chicken farmer and his personal things about what he wanted to do with the region? How is the failed chicken farmer and his electricians going to respond to a betrayal of the direction that this state should go? Finland could possibly drift away from Germany. The movement could be led by Veikko Vennamo, leader of the Finnish Rural Party. I would thank you for that. This is the sort of stuff that I'm streaming for. Vecchio. Oops. Vecchio Vennamo. Oh, yeah, so like having some sort of like Finnish isolationism from the New Order seems like it makes a lot of sense. So Civil War in this timeline, I'm not sure if they will. The thing is that Germania is supposed to be the most plausible timeline where there's a Cold War. And in the event where Mustache Man dies and a power struggle happens, I'm going to have like a segment of it where I like get out of character for a minute and I'm like, look, there's so many different ways that the way that this power struggle would have unfolded, if it ended it in any other way than the one I would be presenting, the Americans would be able to destroy this system and liberate Europe from this terrible reality. And those are interesting to look at. But let's look at the very, 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 very slim chance of the way that this would play out, because the longer that this disaster goes on, the more interesting things happen that we can consider in our timeline and get a interesting viewpoint on. So what's going on? I am yapping and I am mapping. I'm mapping the assets for hypothetical part 4 of Project Germania, and talking a lot about it and sharing my ideas and getting ideas from the viewers here so that we can make something interesting and fun together. What's going on with Turkey in this timeline? Well, here's the interesting thing about Turkey. The Mandate of Syria by the French state, that's going to be an interesting thing in and of itself. I don't know if the Rashid al-Gailani Golden Square coup would have happened in this timeline. Probably not, because the time that the coup happened, the Axis were at war with Britain, but they might not have been. So then it's like an asset of Germany to be able to execute this whenever they want. Italy controls all these islands. Turkey has claims on all these islands. The Greeks claim these islands, but they don't control them. South Italy is here. If South Italy is being influenced by America and America wants Turkey on their side, they could give them all these islands. What would happen with Greece in that circumstance? Because while the monarchy of Greece is, the monarch is Victor Emmanuel, the Greek collaborators, like I said before, want to bring their old monarchy back. The old monarchy coming back would mean that they would claim Bulgarian lands. What are the Germans going to do about that? Misak I Mili. Yeah, I'm aware of this map. The like interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting things that we can do with this, because it could be that Bulgaria gets partitioned post-Axis. Like, Romania gets their little sliver of Dobruja back. This greater Serbian Federation gets Macedonia. The Greeks, whether they're aligned with the Allies or not, get their claimed coastal territories. And then because the Axis and the Americans are so focused on trying to get Turkey in on this situation, they might give territorial concessions. Because I have the map here, I can copy paste it into the document so you guys can see. Make a MISC reference. So this is one, but the bleed preventing to show. So I can see this and this may be happening. This might be a problem with Iraq. It could be that because the Germans just need the resources, they might be fine giving these border territories in Caucasia back, because like they're so overextended in the east. They are probably pleading for solutions from the Turks, right? Cyprus is going to be interesting. Rhodes is going to be very interesting because that's an Italian territory right now. And then another former territory with a lot of Muslim majority stuff. So then that could be the new border here, and then Greece goes up here, and then Bulgaria is really upset. It could be interesting. I don't know if I'll map that out because, well, I mean, what do you guys want? Like, I like making maps, but it distracts me from talking to you guys, and I like doing that. So one thing I will do right now is, because I have this thing here, I want this to be a rump Albania, and this rump Albania, it already has these territories separated, so we can go like this, and then there we go. And then if we remove that, you can see these invisible borders here. And then we'll fill this in like this because we know this is going to be some sort of administrative division. These little borders, they make the visuals of the content so much better, but they're pretty difficult to do, especially when there's different administrative regions between our history and alternate history. What would relations between Serbia and Croatia be like? Terrible, because there are Serbians living in Croatia, and the Croatians are like, this is ours, and everything is ours, and we don't want you to have any of it. Yes. What was this? What else is it? Indonesian. I want Indonesia to be... The Dutch army was planning to install... That was the Westerling. Yeah, that's the interesting thing about this, because like it sounds kind of like this, at first glance it kind of looks controversial, and it's also the fact that I have Indonesia as a mandate right now, but because the Dutch East Indies were the exiled government of the Netherlands, and then So here's the really complicated thing with the way that Germania works. I don't know if you guys have seen part 1 and 2, but in order for peace to be established between Germany and Britain, they signed the Dunkirk Treaty. Germany doesn't want any exiled governments existing, but these territories still needed to be under some sort of management by the Europeans because they weren't ready to be transitioned yet. They'd use the League of Nations mandate system to allow Britain to oversee these territories, but with the idea that they'd become independent. But obviously, League of Nations mandates, they weren't really becoming independent. But then the League of Nations, which is formed with Germany, which means that it's not going to be like our timelines, United Nations. There's going to be stipulations, or the general culture of the world after a German victory means that there's going to be some very non-politically correct in our timeline ideas about how the minority regions, or like the colonies of the world, be administered. So there would be people like Americans being like, okay, well, these people live here, let's let them live, which is kind of ironic given their history, but at that point in time they also understood that it's just better for stability. Because even in the case of like China and Japan, Europeans wanted to colonize China and Japan, but the Americans forced Japan to open up their markets so that people could get the things they wanted from Japan without fighting. And when there were several different ideas for a partitioning of China, like literally, like the South would go to, part of it would go to France, part of it would go to Britain, Russia would get all the North, and the British would get like the Yellow River, or whatever the middle river here. They'd get that as a zone of influence. And it's okay, well, yeah, zones of influence, then what happens? They just partition it, just like every other time that the Europeans have ever partitioned anything. But America was like, guys, why don't we just trade with them? So then the treaty port system was expanded. Several different people took a bunch of different things. There was like a mandate here, like the Shanghai, I forget what it was, like international cities. Like, yeah, it's not good, it's not better. Well, no, that's not entirely true. Having an entire region completely colonized by a foreign power is bad. Having trade with a country is good. Having unequal treaties that deliberately exploit the people is not good. And that's what these treaty ports were doing, even if it was more ethical than having an entire colony set up, right? And that's the sort of thing that might happen with Indonesia. Right now, it's listed as it being a, like purple. This purple color is supposed to be like Sukarno's Indonesia. But when Japan, in this timeline, tried to invade these colonies, Indonesia had a huge separatist uprising rebellion, because of course they would. Their former overlords are here, and the Japanese are attacking. So it would be like our timeline, but worse. Sukarno might not be able to get the independence that he wanted like he did before in our timeline. So that's pretty interesting. I will look up Westerling affairs, because that might be something that would at least temporarily be executed. So thank you for that suggestion. What's going on with Russia? I actually don't know. I had some ideas that follow the Thousand League Reich style of division, where there's communists here who are fighting, but then an American propped up republic here that would want to unite, but then America wouldn't necessarily be supporting them fully, because whatever ends up being the strongest and most stable thing is the best way to fight against the Germans. I have here all the Central Asian states being independent, but that might not actually be the case. If they were actually independent and fully stable, the Germans could make a big railroad going through Kazakhstan all the way to Beijing, and there'd be this new Silk Road, which is terrifying for the Americans because they want China in their sphere. But historically, there's a lot of collaboration between Japan and Germany and China. Falkenhausen was sent there as a German mission during the time of of Mustache Man, and even before Mustache Man, Hans von Seat helped organize the communist encirclement campaigns, and they traded their tungsten a lot, and they would have a pretty good relationship, which is terrifying to consider. So Germany is way too overextended to prop up these sort of states when they're trying to colonize all these. These states probably wouldn't even want to be friends with Germany, given the fact that they're colonizing all these states over here. Like, what? You're next, right? So that's an interesting dynamic. There's also the fact that China would want to take over Tibet and take the McCammon Line, which is like a little sliver of land in between Tibet and the British Raj currently, as it is depicted. It might even be shown up in this administrative, in this here. And at this red line, I think this is the line, the McCammon Line. China claims all this territory, but India controls it. I think that's what's going on right now. And then, I don't know what about these lines. I know that Bhutan is having some problems with China encroaching on their territory right now. And then there's this whole fiasco. We don't talk about that. Anyway, this is going to be a big tension point, especially because the British, just like the Germans, are going to have a really hard time garrisoning their colonial empire. The British are a lot less terrible to their colonial subjects like the Germans are in this timeline, because they don't see it as living space. They see it as, I don't know, markets, right? So, but it's going to be a big problem. And the way that Germany's ideology exists, like, you know, the whole like Indo-Aryan thing, it could be that the Indian nationalists have some sort of affinity with the Germans. I have played too many a chess game with a Indian who had Aryan and a swastika on their name to believe that there isn't some sort of there are some people who may have that affiliation. So we would probably need to study that, which is terrible to think of and consider, but it helps us have a better understanding of the world that we live in today, which is why I love alternate history, especially as a teaching platform. So where is the... Oh, do I already have them having the Ottoman border? Is that a mistake? No. The Ottomans had a bigger border in here, right? I'm trying to look at past versions of the Ottoman Empire. Is this a misaligned map? Maybe? Like, what is this? Yeah, it has to be misaligned. I need to look into that a little more. But I could actually see the Germans giving concessions to the Turks in order for them to be on their side. Madagascar could potentially collapse. Following the power struggle, France could potentially not be able to control Madagascar. Yes. Wow, damn. What exactly? Revenging becomes a stable republic. I agree. I would love for that to happen too. But the interesting thing is that because Germany's in this alternate United Nations, anytime that any other nation in the world would attempt to recognize Russia, they'd be like, Russia doesn't exist, bro. And they just veto it. And they'd be like, what do you mean? And then all these Russians here are going to be like, what do you mean? What do you mean we don't exist? So it could be like they don't have a seat on the United Nations Council, but they everyone else is participating and recognizing Russia, which is an interesting tension point too. What else is going on here? Treaty ports, yeah. Getting freely in northern Italy a part of Germany. This section here? Yeah, maybe. I think that sort of thing would potentially happen later into the war, when now that the South Italians are having a lot more American support, the Germans would need to justify their security of the southern border more and more and just take more away from Italy. I was sort of even implying that because they're outer nations to loot, they might even cannibalize northern Italy and take their industry and stuff. So yeah, could not be great. Why is Ukraine so wide? Because the administrative region of RK Ukraine was that big. Why? Oh, okay, well, because these aren't autonomous zones. They're colonization territories. Let's look at this interesting map over here. Let's just look back at American history. Let's look at... Oh yeah, look at this. What are all these dark blue territories? This. What are these? They're territories. They're colonization zones. This big territory of whatever the heck turned into these states. I don't know the states off by heart, so I can't say. I think North and South Dakota, Montana, and I don't know what this one is. Utah, Nevada, Washington. I should know which one this one is. California. All these places used to be American territories, and the borders of these territories didn't end up being the states that they would be in our history. I'm going to map out what I think that the most plausible way for Germany to keep their territories the way that it is currently in the 60s. Like, if the pragmatics, or whatever the architects faction would be called, take over and then adjust their policy in the East, this is what I think it would look like. So I'm going to take this big folder, which has all these different administrative divisions. I'm going to try to visualize them in a different way than I have currently, so that people can understand the differences between these different areas of Germany, so that we can have a proper discussion about this. And one of the reasons why in my timeline, one of the points of propaganda that the Germans in this timeline would throw in the Americans' face is that if the Americans start trying to say that all these colonies in the East need to be independent, then the Germans are going to be like, okay, we'll give independence to all the natives that lived here, and then we can talk. Which, yeah, like, I don't agree with that at all. Like, this is a lot worse, especially industrial, and they're speed running it, and I don't know. There's a lot of depth to this conversation that I can't properly convey live. I would need to write it script and be very careful with how I word it because of how sensitive it is. But here's the thing. So we look at this RK Poland, general government. So the general government wasn't actually even a Reichskommissariat. Mustache Man had so much disdain for the people of Poland, they didn't even teach them how to, like, speak their own... What was it? Like, how do I word this? Mustache Man had said that this place needs to be a Germanic homeland within 10 years. So, I wonder how he would accomplish that. Right? Probably not fun. Same with this Reichsprotectorate of Böhmen and Mähren, Bohemia and Moravia. This Reichsprotectorate is being Germanized. The people who live here are being forced to abandon their language, and as a sign of the continued whatever the heck you want to call it, this place would eventually lose its, like, slight benefits. Like, I think they had like health pensions. The reason why they had this and it wouldn't be applied everywhere else is because of the shared history of the Czech peoples and the German peoples. They were in Austria-Hungary, they were in the Holy Roman Empire, they were directly related. A lot of the culture of Czechia is influenced by Germans. The Germanization policies would extend here. So this is what the Metropolitan Reich would need to be in like a couple of years. I don't know if they'd be able to manage all this. I don't think they'd be able to take over all this. I think that given the fact that there were minorities in this region, we would take the borders of Ukraine today, and then we would invert that. We would duplicate this layer, I guess. We would cut it between this administrative border here. This is really rough, and it's probably going to change in the future. But this administrative border from here onwards would need to become a protectorate. Now, this is going to sound very controversial because it is. There's no way in heck that if they had their way, that this would continue to be a quote-unquote protectorate. The fact that this is going to be a really high place of interest because of geopolitical and ideological reasons, having this specific area be a core part of Germany, which is Ukrainian, right? Like, this protectorate isn't going to last. So this is going to be the border that we are going to use. We are going to separate this out as well. We're going to call one Reichsprotectorate Ukraine. We're going to call the other Reichskommissariat Volga. You're going to be Volga because I have to do that. This is the Reichsprotectorate. So if we look here, we're going to get the borders of this protectorate here and the colors of the protectorate. I'm going to go to not RK Volga, Rice Protectorate, Ukraine. We're going to contiguous, go do, and that's even generous, very generous. Select all this. And then I think these are the border. Yeah, so then we do that. So this would be a, oh, you guys are cool, man. Awesome. Yay. Give us your bread, give us your grain so that we can in the next 10 years do the same thing that we did to the Czechs. Yeah, not fun, you guys. Not fun. I really don't like working on Axis victories. It makes me very depressed. Because I know that I'm worried about even looking at chat. People are like, oh no, dude, this is actually wholesome Chungus 100. No, it wasn't. This is terrible. Nobody should be wanting this. And then this is the Volga, so we get rid of that. So now we have a separate protectorate here, Volga RK, because they wouldn't be able to manage this, but they would still want this. This is a other region that they would want to be taking over. This is just going to be a big extraction zone. They don't have the capability of doing that. If, what was the guy? Diet Nietzsche. If Diet Nietzsche, because he was born in this area, he would want this to be prioritized. It could even be that the Central Rada becomes a big collaboration government. That's the one thing that I'm going to have a problem mapping, is that because there's like the Lakot autonomy and there's like maybe another autonomy there in Russia. I'm not sure how to depict what those would look like in this color scheme, so that's going to be a little difficult to do. But I know that Leningrad was supposed to be just like completely razed, and because of the power projection that having this city has over Finland and stuff, they would want this, so it would probably be a core Gao. This would be this and this would be probably need to be that. Yeah, I want to read chat because there's a lot of people that's been talking. Let's see. Wouldn't they also integrate the Netherlands? They probably would if they had their way. Astrakhan and Arkhangelsk, not part, or even Baku. Really? The Arkhangelsk would be a... Isn't Arkhangelsk here and isn't Baku here? Like, the AA line is achieved. I don't know what you mean. Revolt in Ethiopia, yes, there would be. To China side with, they have good relations, probably Germany, but then the Americans would want to avoid that, and then China would benefit from both people trying to influence them. This Ukraine-wide is what sent me on this huge tangent to begin with. Annex Macedonia? Are you serious? Why would they annex Macedonia? I don't get that. In Poland, yeah. Fashionables want to be the Americans do. Yeah, exactly. Germany just wanted to copy what America did. Mustache Man just wanted to copy what America did. Cameroon. Stripoland Slovakia is supposed to be part. Really? I'll look into that. Sweden would be under Germany. Yeah, they'd be like a heavy puppet, but they wouldn't be... Like, they wouldn't transform it into an RK or anything like that. Belgium was led by Leon de Grelle. Okay, but like, I think I said this. I don't. Maybe I was ranting to somebody and I didn't. It wasn't public. Yeah, I was ranting about this. Like, oh guys, Mustache Man liked the screaming Belgian. Hey, why did he like him? Oh, you want to be his son? Think about what Mustache Man thought about literally every other person in the world. He wanted to dominate them. Having him as a son, be like, oh yeah, look at how this loyal little boy of mine. He did not have a positive view of Leon de Grelle in the way that a father should, and the fact that I'm Lord Dad should probably mean fucking something. He just wanted to control him. They had no desire to grant Leon de Grelle any of the sort of things that he wanted to have. There would be no Wallonian whatever. It would just be German. Everybody who would be of a certain tier of people would need to speak and act German. That's the entire point of this all. And it's a part of their ideology. And any sort of like, oh, well, Yelling Man said when he saw Russians, they were a higher tier people than his hypothetical adopted father said. That doesn't mean that the hypothetical adopted father shared the same view or would even consider his point of view when he himself was like, Wallonians shouldn't exist. They should just be Germans. Like, I don't know how else to explain this. That is not a point in favor of this. It's ridiculous. Yeah, so the Reichskommissariat Ukraine capital, not in Kiev. Why? Because they had to do something to the people there before they could consider moving it. Like, think about it. Why wouldn't they put it in the center if it's supposed to be a autonomous region? It wasn't. Japan and Finland. Yeah, so honorary, that's just a way to, like, cope with their ideology not matching with the geopolitical situation. They could say that about literally anyone. Germany, like Japan and Finland, over the rest of the Axis. Germans thought the Italians a joke. Yeah, I know. Sorry. I know that you probably don't agree with that. I just was reminded of a Zoomer historian video that I saw that really pissed me off. So I didn't mean to get angry at you specifically, but when it came to that sort of apologia, yeah, I just really don't like that. Okay, so Ostland. Let's just go, for the sake of keeping it simple, we'll do this. Something I do want to see, is it mapped in this World War II? No, this is like the IRL administrative region borders. This is supposed to be a part of RK, but they probably didn't transfer it at this point in time. And the giving of autonomy to the Rod, I want to look this up. It was like something that they started to do when they were losing the war. Wow, yeah, it was really just that pathetic. Wow. So the collaborationist regime of BLR was here. This is Russian, so this would be probably, if there was any autonomy for the Russian, which was very unlikely, it would go over here. This is also historically, so I would say that they would extend this autonomy, quote unquote, to this area as well. So we're still in the Ostland category. This will be a something that I learned while researching is that the I don't even want to paint it this color because people are going to misconstrue it. I'm just gonna like give it this color and then a lighter thing here for the border between. What was I about to say? Oh yeah, something I learned is that some Germans thought because the Minsk marshes were so inhospitable to their peoples, what do you want to call it, that the entire thing should be turned into a national park. Now, what would happen to the people living there? They don't care. Ugh. This is a really bleak timeline. But the thing about Germania that I want to do is I don't want it to just be like, oh yeah, and then because the system is so awful, everything dies. And because they're the villains lose. That's a very, like, I want conventional storytelling. It's just it's wishful thinking. If they had the amount of control without the direct intervention that they would have, it would not be very fun for everybody. It would be very bad. Yeah, Lord says search history, be like, what? Yeah, the thing that I think is really bleak too is that, like, you know how there's this trend in there's a trend nowadays to like respect the unceded territories of the people who lived here that were taken over. Like, not saying that I'm going to have it in this timeline, but you know the TNO ending for like Spear. They could have stuff like that, and it's like, oh well, we want to acknowledge that we took this land, but then do nothing about it. Like, that's probably what's gonna fucking happen. It's just so bleak, man. Why do people like this stuff? I don't know. See why I said that I don't really want to do another episode of this stuff? Well, yeah, this is the thing. I get stuck on the very bleak future of the way that they wanted the world to be, that I get too depressed, and then I go, hey, look at this dead mod. This is funny and fun. Like, then I just do that. So, little behind the scenes here. This is the way I added the ceded territories. Let's say that they do cede the territories, and there's no RK Burgundy, because that seems to be the best way for the Germans to get the French on their side. Maybe they even give the Wallonians over, and then the Wallonians get francophoned. Suck on that, Leon de Grelle. But let's say that the Germans don't give nearly that much. Let's reveal this too, so that we understand that this is French border. Now, this RK Burgund would not exist. It would just be another part of Germany. Is this what people want? Like, people just, like, I don't understand. People just see the fact that they separated regimes when they weren't even regimes at all. Like, you go, oh, it's an autonomous territory. No, it wasn't. It was never supposed to be. Huge misunderstanding of history. Just because it's a separate tag in Hearts of Iron 4 doesn't mean that the people there have any sort of freedom. Look at that. Oh, no, look at how pretty the borders are. It's like, oh yeah, maybe, but like, what if you weren't a German and you were living here? You wouldn't be for long. Well, I map Russia, independent ASSRs. The thing about Russia, and I do want to talk about Russia now. So let's look away at this terrible 1955. Right. Let's look away from this terrible, terrible thing. Instead, look at what we have in 1945. What did I just do? Journey wins timeline. Don't look at part 4 stuff. Look at 1946. Hold on, I want to read a lot of comments before I continue. Wouldn't Banat be a part of Germany? So the thing about Mustache Man's policy in the East, he even did this with South Tyrol. He didn't care about those regions. He thought that the future of the Germans was in the East. Even before the Second World War begun, if you are to believe what he said, which I doubt that you do, but let's say like you should not believe in what he said, but he gave up his claim to Alsace-Lorraine, allegedly, at least from my understanding. But all these territories that weren't going to be in Germany, that were in Western in Europe and the Balkans, that had Germans, he wanted them to move into the East so that he could stabilize the East and he could have good relationships with the rest of the future client states of Europe in his world order. So Banat, you can see this in the policy that they had in Banat, where the region was administered by Germans, even if they were a minority there, without the explicit idea of making a separate German state that some of the locals had wanted to do. In the event that the relationships break down with Hungary, Romania, and Croatia, and they occupied the whole thing, yeah, maybe at that point they make a Reichskommissariat Balkans and then do that whole scenario there. It makes sense given their historical tendencies, but the initial idea was always that these minorities of Germans that lived in their allies' lands should instead move east because they have a lot of work to do over there. Not very fun, but yeah. Honestly, I do hope if you continue Germany lose this Cold War, and like you, I don't like Azerbaijan as well for the horrors of it being overdone. Yes. Taboritsky did not have the clout in Germany to take charge of Moscow. Yeah, he... First of all, their ability to like research exactly who was Jewish and who wasn't would allow for them to know this guy isn't to be trusted because of their ideology, not because of anything in reality. Their ideology is anti-Jewish, so they'd be like, we can't trust this guy, but he's being useful for now. So he'd have a huge mark on his back, and as soon as he did anything that they didn't agree with, they would eliminate him, just like all the other ones. That's just the only way that their ideology makes sense, and it makes sense given their historical context and precedent. So, no, there's no way in hell he would be a leader. The way that Mustache Man saw the East and all of his ideological friends saw the East and these E-tier peoples was that they needed a leader. They needed a leader that wasn't of their own. The whole, like, white supremacist idea of like the Africa can't govern itself. It's the same sort of thing with the peoples of the East, and according to the ideology that we're depicting here, unfortunately. So there's no way they would allow a Russian to administer Moscowian. It's like if the Americans said the entire of the US territories here should be administered by a collaborative or non-hostile Native American. That never happened. It never would. I think there is some talk about giving the quote-unquote 5 civilized tribes U.S. states. I think US of Z has a video on that. I would check that out, but that's not what's happening here. No way in hell. What's the state of Canada? They fought in World War II, and with the war lost, how did they develop like a Germany? Well, something terrifying to consider is that the leader of Canada, Mackenzie King, had this weird spiritual fascination with Mustache Man. He had these diaries where he was like, I was born in New Brunswick, and Brunswick is named after a German city. So we should be like, and I feel like a connection to you, bro. I think the diaries were burnt. Those are the only things that we know that he actually supposedly said. So that's kind of creepy. Maybe the British would take care of him once they learned about that. But I think that they only uncovered his diaries when he died. Yeah, no, really, that was a real thing. Like, I'm pretty sure that's a real thing. It's terrifying. There's so many weird things like that. But he's just one guy. He may have been in a position of leadership in Canada, but that didn't mean anything about the rest of Canada. But there is some sad realities that would come into place with the victory of the Germans and their view on people in general. Like, eugenics would be probably more accepted. Even the best Canadian, Tommy Douglas, that people really like, the guy who made healthcare, his initial proposals were like the subnormal families, so people with diseases or hereditary diseases shouldn't get free healthcare, which is really disgusting. Kind of defeats the whole point of having healthcare for a nation, people. It should be helping each other and helping uplift each other. But that sort of idea would probably have a lot more cadence, given the fact that a very major world power is executing that on a far harsher scale. I would hope that in this timeline, people would acknowledge the hypocrisy and get rid of it, but then you would probably miss out on the only way that Canada would get free healthcare in this timeline. Maybe not the only way, but it would be associated with that because he would probably not abandon that claim like he did in our history. I know, right? Why would anybody want this timeline? I heard people commenting on Rewriting History's Victory of Evil series that this is supposed to be the better timeline. No, it's not. The whitewashed beliefs that people have about the policies in the East and everything else, you just read his book. Read his book. It's all there. You can see his plans. This is not for debate. Yeah. God would not allow this timeline? Yeah. Yeah. I hope so. But then again, I am the quote-unquote God of this scenario. I'm the author. And I feel a responsibility to properly depict this reality instead of looking at the broad strokes and whitewashing it for easy consumption. That's unethical to me. It was pure evil. I really dislike anybody saying that Axis victory is a good thing too. I when I learned about that, I was researching a bunch of stuff for Call to Krieg way back in the day, learning a lot about Canadian history, especially because I'm looking up like Canada and Germany stuff, and then you learn that, and it really rubbed me the wrong way. Let's put it that way. What is going on here? Doesn't mean focus on the map. What's going on here? Position unappealing, higher ups, health in decline, loses power. That's a very optimistic way to view that. That implies that the people who were kowtowing to the massive dictator himself didn't have any sort of desire to have the position themselves. I don't agree with that at all. I think that the position itself, yeah, maybe in a future where they stabilize, would need to be less dictatorial and transition to more civilian governance or whatever, the party governance. I wouldn't dare call it civilian. I retract that statement. The party would need to be stronger in order for this to be stable, but then the party is just repeating everything that their founder had proclaimed, so it's not going to improve anything in the form of humanitarian goodness. The flying fat man, maybe. I call him Meyer because he said, if the bombers passed the Rhine, call me Meyer, so I'm just calling him Meyer. One of the most terrifying things is that loading quote in TNO where it's the same as the vanilla quote, but instead of it being Hermann Meyer saying it, it's Hermann Goering, and then you just learn everything that you need to about the scenario from that one quote. Is there any other scenarios you want to do instead of this? Literally any other scenario I probably would prefer. So, I don't know, maybe this is the final cry of Germania. But I don't know, because there are really interesting things that come out of this. The study on how the world would be impacted is really interesting. There would be a lot of rays of hope in this timeline with the way that America would hopefully start to act. But without a direct invasion... Well, I wouldn't... Without a direct invasion. There are plenty of opportunities for the system to be dismantled, but the fact that the system had gone on for so long has terrifying implications for the rest of the world, even if the Germans were to be dissolved, or not Germans, even if this state were to be dissolved and freedom would be restored to all the people who are being oppressed by it, the damage is still done. So, don't call me dad, call me Lord Dad. I'm not your dad. I know you don't mean it, but I just really do want to avoid the parasocial relationship problem. Have you ever heard about his brother? He was based. He let a lot of Jews escape. That's cool. I think I learned a little bit of his brother, but not too much. Eastern Europe is just gone, but places like France and the satellites aren't in a much better position, pressing as F. Personally, don't see the regime lasting 1,000. Yeah, more like 20. I agree. There's no way it would last 1,000 years. It should be do a Byzantine survive scenario. Yeah, I would like that. Yeah, I might actually stop it, but I do want to see the people's reaction to the way that this is going with the stream. I want to know what you guys think, because I think it could be pretty interesting to look into this more. Maybe without all the grim realities, but then again, if I'm not depicting the grim realities, then I'm not showing the grim realities. And then people forget about the grim realities, and then they think that any similarities to our history is just fake. Let's stop looking at this terrible thing over here. Let's talk about the ramifications in here, because this is interesting. Maybe not Russia. Maybe the reason why I haven't been painting Russia is because every single time that I do, the entire idea of the fact that their peoples are being completely mutilated in the East is terrifying. But when it comes to Asia, here, China, Japan, the Chinese situation is interesting because they have the ability to go either way. And the problem with the Chiang Kai-shek winning is that they would still have a lot of intrinsic problems. Thousand Week Rect does a good job of depicting the fact that warlords would still be the main backbone of the state, and any attempts for the government to centralize their control over the warlords would cause civil wars. And the fact that this would continue to be going on for a long time could lead to another civil war, and then maybe the communists come back again, because that sort of system just really didn't do well for the people there. But the fact that this would be aligned with Germany means that the Americans would need to try to find a way to get a government aligned to them, but there wouldn't be many people who would be willing to stand up against Chiang Kai-shek when the last time that was attempted was the Wang Jingwei regime, which collapsed. But maybe Wang Jingwei just becomes an American collaborator, but he preferred the Japanese because of his own personal beliefs. The way that India would collapse would be a lot more different. The way that the British Empire would collapse would be a lot more different. Something I realized about Britain that's kind of terrifying to consider is, in our timeline, the British decolonized for several reasons, including economic. After having to fight the war for so long, they sacrificed their empire, and by doing so, they liberated a lot of people and made sure that they weren't being actively cleansed. Not saying that the Soviet Union was particularly bright, but it was a lot brighter than whatever the hell this is. So everybody took them down, yay, but then the British Empire needs to go down too. There's no way that they can support the continued garrisoning. The rise of the Soviet Union meant that they would be supporting anti-imperialist measures. It was time for the empire to go, and the Americans and their ideology became the more dominant one. And we live in a world today where, even if there are problems with everything, the Americans and the Africans have some level of independence rather than being continuously ruled by a colonial overlord. In this timeline, Britain does a peace with Germany with the idea that if they did this peace, they would be able to preserve their empire. In the event where, because of the Asian uprisings and unrest, the Americans suggest to the British to consider slowing down or loosening the chain of their imperial dominion, how would the populace feel that were sympathetic to the Germans? In this circumstance, the Germans are offering them to keep their empire, and the Americans are trying to get rid of it. Why are they signing up with the Americans? There could be even a civil war in Britain. That's pretty terrifying to consider. But this highlights the sort of ideological component of fashion. It's this like disdain for liberty, freedom, this resentment of a enemy that they can define whatever they want to. Yeah, it wouldn't last. The British Empire wouldn't last. The French state also is going to have a hard time. The fact that the Chinese would be potentially supporting Vietnamese independence revolts when the French and the Germans are also potentially friends, and Germany would want the rubber there. It could be a way that the Chinese and the Americans collaborate, and the way that the Americans and the Chinese get them in their sphere of influence, which is an interesting point of tension. But there would be a lot of people who would be very upset with any sort of idea that the British Empire would need to collapse. So there's that. And this is depressing. Why do people want this? I don't know. Any other scenarios, Glimmer of Hope? Yeah. Stop right, yeah. What's going on here? Would I ever do an Imperial Federation timeline? Yes. It's one of the most interesting things that I have ever really seen. In fact, I want to see if I can pull up an Imperial Twilight map. Imperial Twilight Toy 4 mod. There's a Hearts of Iron 4 mod way back in the day. There's where is it? I think it might have. I think the original poster might have just deleted it. Oh, here it is. Here it is. So let's just talk about something else now. Although this isn't much better. Imperial Twilight could be that there's a federation where the crown of the empire and the Canadians, the South Africans, the Australians, the New Zealand, all these people have, it's like a USSR but with the monarch and different administrative regions. Ireland too, that's going to be hard, confusing. This is probably an interesting dead mod scenario. I could look into that, but maybe that's a fun video I can do after this. But then again, I have the Culture Creep video to make. Would Germany realistically collapse in this timeline? Obviously, control over the East would be lost, but what would happen to Germany itself? People, borders, government. So another bleak part about this timeline is that they had an entire generation of kids born when the movement started to happen from in the 30s. By the time that it's 1945, these kids are 15-year-olds. They would be part of youth organizations that would indoctrinate them. And because of the way that human minds work at that age, they wouldn't develop the critical thinking to realize maybe the stuff I'm being told is BS. So until they have moments of like clashing ideologies with the way that, like, moments of clarity where the ideology they've been told clashes with what they're seeing, until that happens, they're not going to want to do anything differently. The only people who would want to do anything differently are the adults, and the adults are benefiting greatly from all this stuff. Maybe their loved ones have died in the war and there'd be an anti-war thing, and I highlight that. But the rising generation would not be anti this, they'd be pro this. The reason why I like TNO and their approach is that because it's the 60s, the people who were raised in that environment could potentially change their minds. And when things start to go south and there's leadership struggles in there, the people get a lot more disillusioned, and then things collapse from there. And that's the interesting thing. And that is the sort of story that helps illustrate the problems with the ideology. Maybe I just end up doing a TNO video instead of this. That's the sort of story that helps illustrate the problems of the ideology and helps show the natural consequences. Because the way that the German Civil War is structured, there's the 4 factions. And the idea is that, like, oh, if it was just the party, it would be good. Oh, if it was just the SS, it would be good. Oh, if it was just reformers, it would be good. Or if it was just militarists, it would be good. Whatever. Like, people can say whatever they want about each aspect of the ideology itself. It's like, what if it was just these people and all these other people weren't there? Still problems. And like, maybe the only way that it lasts for a really long time is if it gets reformed. And in that case, it's very terrifying, very bad, and awful. The Dengist path for Spear is very awful. The worst outcome of all of them. So I think in the Bormann path, there's like going to be another civil war with people who've just been so disillusioned to the whole thing, they want a regime change. And that's interesting to consider and look into. And then the Goering path, obviously, if they go to war with any major power, the entire world dies. So that's that. Well, it's like a better and worse in different ways situation. Thank you for the wonderful Friday comment. Maybe this stream was a mistake. I'm pretty depressed now, but I like being able to talk about it and vent about it, because maybe this video just becomes the go-to of like, where's Germania Part 4? Yeah, just watch the stream where I realized the exact depth of how awful all this would be. Why would Germany collapse? It would be much like modern China, where most countries importing cheap goods from them. Yes, I agree. That is what would most likely happen if the system stays stable. If it doesn't stay stable, then it's likely that that wouldn't be the case. Domination of the Draka. Yeah, like the fact that there's even an author who made all that stuff is like really cringe. Like, check out my fan fiction where this guy who's the worst person in the world gets all these things that happen to him. Like, isn't it that like at different points of history, all like the worst people for some reason still are born the same way in our history? They have the same ideology as our history. They migrate there, somehow get into a large position of power and execute their version of the ideology. Like, why? Like, dude, it's just really cringe. I don't understand why anybody would make something like that. What's the Dengist path for spear? What happens in it? So the dynamic of the spear path is that there are the Gang of Four who want reforms to the point where they don't want Nazism, but Spear wants Nazism. If Spear manages to keep the party in line under him and keeps influence high of the Gang of Four, but not too high to the point where they can overthrow him or puppet him, then that's the Dengist path. So it could either be that the commissariat system is reformed to not be actively repressing the people of the East, but instead using them as resource operations. It could be that these regions are like associated states. Regardless, the Dengist path means that the German system remains and continues for another decade or so, which is definitely the worst outcome, because then it's stable and more legitimacy of the governance style. It influences other states. Very bad. I would need to look into the themes of Draka more, but the sort of stuff there, I don't know. The way that everything is structured is not really great. Yes, from my research, it does make sense for Goering to be a reformer in the sense that he didn't care much for the ideology. Meanwhile, Speer's technocracy and his actual historical actions of the forced labor movement would show that he isn't much of a reformer that people make him out to be. But the reason why he's the reformer in TNO is because of the real life examples of him lying about his involvement in the atrocities and his way to like try to gaslight people. And it's basically what it would need to be if you're going to make such large reforms like that. Yeah, maybe Goering would actually want that because of his fascination with being a Caesar. Like, he'd want to go further than his predecessor, so that makes sense too. And the problem is that we're talking about historical people who we have really good documentation on for all the things that they did and their ideologies and why they did it. But every single depiction of them in any circumstance that isn't the historical documentary is fictional. So we're talking about characters. And you can make these characters do whatever you want. And you can make the characters say and do whatever they want because you can point to what they did, and or like in what they did in one way and be like, this is what it means in this way, or put them in another way and this would mean that way. So people make arguments all the time, but we don't know what they would do because they aren't in this situation. This isn't real. This didn't happen. This is fiction. It's up to the author to determine it, and I feel a responsibility to properly determine it for the sake of making a timeline that helps illustrate the terrors of this timeline. So yeah, like I think that they would be looking for things like that because Atlantis, because the esotericism of their ideology is probably one of the most interesting things to me because of how anti-science it is. Like, didn't the the failed chicken farmer think the world is flat, or like the stars in the sky were like little holes in a veil, like, and then he would just talk to Mustache Man about it all the time, and he'd be like, yeah, bro, like, no wonder they thought that when Mustache Man was prescribed in our timeline, illegal drugs. Like, I won't talk about it too much, but yeah, I would look into that, what he was prescribed for his treatments for his Parkinson's and stuff. Almost collapsed in reality in the 30s, rearming too fast. The economy couldn't keep up with the excessive. Yes, they did almost collapse, and it was a big gamble to like get all of it from looting. And I try highlighting that in part 3. Yeah, I really don't. Maybe this is just the end of Germania. I might make an announcement. It just feels like a shame because of all this other stuff I've written. Maybe make a part 4 where I look into the other dynamics that I mentioned, but more from a non-narrative perspective. Like, you know, in my projects, I like tell the story as it's unfolding, but in Lore Grave videos and other things like that, I take a perspective of this is what would happen because of these divergences. It'll probably be that part 4 is that we cover all the loose ends. I cover the broad strokes, what I think that these outcomes would be, how it would influence things, and how it would collapse. I think that's how I'd probably end Germania. But yeah, going too much deep into this may not be best for my mental health. Yes, Ian is definitely right about what their goals were. Ancient farming techniques. Yeah. They put a lot of debt in our reality, but I don't know. The economy is still not very good. Wouldn't change anything, Der Tot. Explain why Germany would have an economic disaster post-war, because even in their own documentation for the effectiveness of their labor policies, it's 1/3 effectiveness. You can't tax indentured servants. The only way that you'd be able to do it is do everything else that they did. It's not an actual economic model, it's a model of conquest. It doesn't last. And all of the other nations, the more modern nations, because they're trying to go back to their roots, yeah, they're going back to ancient medieval times. All the other modern nations of the world would be able to outperform them in every single way and destroy them. What happens next? I would probably just do some more Loregrave videos. The Call to Creed video is going to be pretty comprehensive. I don't know if I do another project. I don't have any specific projects in mind right now. But I think I'll make a part 4 of Germania and then just close it out and be like, this is what I think would happen, and it's not pretty. Anyway, yeah, so I think I will wrap up the stream here. Everybody, thank you for watching Germania part 1, 2, and 3. I'll make a part 4 sometime soon and talk about the things in this video. Honestly, might even put no monetization on this stream because of the sort of stuff I talked about, just because probably not in terms of service. But I'll keep it out because it's important to talk about this stuff and not hide behind plausibility or whatever, you know what I mean? It's like, oh, it's alternate history, but I'm talking about real stuff all the time and how terrible it is, so. I'm removing that comment, Robert. That is really cringe. So it would be like this, but it wasn't. I don't know. Yeah, thank you all for connecting and doing all that stuff. I'll see you guys another time. Happy Friday. Have a good weekend. See you around.